The Sekrak Bay is under attack. Legions of the undead have left the armies of the living floundering as uncoordinated defenders attempt to hold whatever settlements they can. Following the second battle of the Khazi River, the Wizards' Conclave decided to put their support behind the small but developed realm of Kisikar, equipping their forces with the most modern weapons available. An army of 20,000 humans and kobolds sailed for the besieged city of Vlivtse, engaging the undead attackers from behind and scoring a decisive victory before marching on the nearby city of Ortskar. Kesio the Dread, the Dracolich commanding the undead legions, was enraged at this defeat, but could not yet abandon the northern campaign. The tide of the war was turning, but victory was still years away. Welcome to the conclusion of the War of 7,000 Days. If you didn't catch the last video, you can find it in the cards or in the link in the description. Otherwise, remember to like and subscribe, and if you've got money to spare, even though this economy, consider donating to our coffee page. Now, let's get into the video. The battles of Vlivtse or Ortskar marked a pivotal point in the war, as the living armies were able to follow those victories with further advances. As the army of the living marched on Barnakar's city, the undead advanced in the north. The northern campaign had slowed down over the last 4 years, with long sieges against the cities of Henkar, Shukar, and Verta, though all three did fall before the war's 3,500th day. Kesio herself now led the attack against the dragon lord of Yakar, Saurus. Kesio had offered Saurus, an ancient shaper and archmage, the opportunity to join her in her immortal empire, but the lord refused. Now, battle raged both above and around the city of Yakar, as the living and dead fought. Eventually, though, one by one, the living joined the fallen. Saurus himself was thrown to the ground, crashing into the lands he ruled, slain. When the city of Shek fell several weeks later, Queen Shakarunku of Kentar pledged her aid to the kingdom of Akarstal and began mobilizing her armies, for it was only a matter of time before the undead were at her gates anyways. This would seem to be a problem for Sen of Khaza, the conclave representative attempting to sway the newly elected Lord Priest of Bevdid, Manmit Bev XV, to join the war. Bevdid and Kentar had been rivals for over a century. However, the wizard was a skilled diplomat. He was able to convince Manmit Bev that if she did also join the war, Shakarunku would take all the glory and spoils herself. And so, a new coalition entered the war. Bevdid, Kentar, Akratstal, Sid, Bev, Ter, Din, Fiv, and Malorma began to raise their forces and move against the undead. There were now 3 coalitions of the living battling against Kesio's Empire of the Dead: the Bevdid Kentar coalition, the Kisikar coalition, and the remnants of the Yamokar Marona coalition. Battles continued to rage across the region for the next 5 years, with the living scoring many victories but also several defeats. Still, slowly but surely, more and more cities and villages were liberated. To the surprise of some, many peasants across the region were still alive, kept around to keep the population up so that the undead could readily cool any village for more recruits when needed, or in villages too small to be worth dedicating a whole army to assault. The advancing army was sure to dig up graveyards, burning bodies and smashing bones to deny the necromancers any possible reinforcements in the event of a counterattack. This did slow the army down, but proved very useful on several occasions. But the armies of the coalitions were taking heavy casualties, and the conclave sought a solution. The march against the dead had begun to stall with a string of narrow defeats. Representatives of the leaders of the allied realms were called to the conclave to mutually plan out their victory. By the end of the meeting, the various coalitions had been joined as the Grand Coalition, and pooled their funds to hire many large mercenary companies from Gorkrak, a goblin realm across the Thras Sea. They had frequently battled the neighboring orcs and humans, but were currently at peace, leaving large numbers of trained and equipped professional goblin and hobgoblin soldiers looking for work. With added reinforcements from the north to bolster their armies, the Grand Coalition began to advance again, reclaiming cities such as Lazel and Lovakar as they pushed ever closer towards Staten. Nadej the Iron Boar led the Kisikari army over what would have once been the Warshak border, followed by a smaller force from Yamokar. 4 days later, the forces of Wanmedbev and Shakarunku crossed in from the east. They met at Esje Hill, just north of the city of Orients, alongside smaller contingents from their allies. The Grand Army was formed. Banners of a dozen realms and the symbols of 100 noble houses were united to a single purpose. Kisikari pikes and gunners shouldered their arms and moved into columns. Bevdid heavy infantry holstered their pistols, slung their shields over their shoulders and tightened the straps off their armor, marching alongside one of the rare rune-born constructs. Kintari cavalry rode ahead, lances held high. Gorkrag mercenaries kept watch on the flanks. Crossbows and spears held ready. The Knights of Yalmakar, few in number after the long war, formed the rear guard. Wizards from the Conclave dispersed themselves among the force for support. Scattered locals, hunters, peasants, soldiers, knights, and everything in between provided auxiliary support, eager for a chance at revenge against the Lich who had so ravaged their homes. Together, they were 130,000 strong. Together, they marched to send the dead back to hell, once and for all. After leaving the camp at Esje, the coalition army moved south along the road. They passed through the city of Orients, but it was practically abandoned and fallen into disrepair. Huge breaches in the walls had rendered the defenses practically useless. Occasional skirmishes with small undead forces broke out along the road, but by and large, the army was moving unopposed. Gisio knew there was only one chance: to crush the army in an ambush and raise it as her own to renew her attacks. And so... the dead burst through the ground, buried alongside the road in preparation. Chaos among the column, infantry scrambling to form up and spread out as cavalry turned about. Guns cracked, blades clashed, spells flew, and then she was upon them. Gisio the Dread, accompanied by her lieutenants Azrang the Bloody Claw and Thatu the Defiler, swooped down on the army, incinerating hundreds still in marching order. Commanders shouted for order.
Form ranks! Hold, men! Hold!
And eventually, an organized defense formed. The battle raged for hours, many of the undead cut down, but many of the living slain. Most only to rise again and attack their former allies. So powerful was Kisio's magic, she barely had to direct her focus to reanimate the dead. Kisio's attention was held on Queen Shekaranko, the only dragon among the army of the living. Believing in the inherent superiority of dragons, Kisio barely entertained the larger army as anything more than an annoyance. So long as she flew high enough, out of range, only the queen posed any real threat. A threat she could deal with, dispatching the mighty Thatu the Defiler to hold the queen's attention as Kisio herself waited for the perfect moment to strike. But so focused was she that the mighty Lich made the same mistake that ended her first life. She underestimated a wizard. Stitz of Warshak landed on Kisio's back. The Shaper imbued his muscles with magical strength, and then stabbed down, driving a lance through Kisio's skull. The Dragon Queen Shekaranku slew Thatu after a protracted aerial battle, and Azrang was felled in a hail of gunfire. And then, it was over. Their animators slain, the remaining army of the undead collapsed back into corpses, and the living celebrated their victory, the commanders meeting for a great feast. May the 4th, 5021, marked the end of the war. The Sekrak Bay had been ravaged by 19 years of brutal conflict, and at least 3 million dead. Perhaps as many as 5. With many local governments dead or in tatters, the victors carved up the Sekrak Bay. Yalmokar's coalition partners divvied up the west of Kisio's farm domain, expanding their own borders. Balkokar, Bevdid, and Kentar established new vassal states. A new kingdom of Warshak was formed, greatly expanded to serve as a buffer state with a sworn order of wizards to watch over Statstikad. Malorma and Akrastal, who had weathered the invasion of their lands, expanded their old borders, quite considerably in Malorma's case. In the west, the Wizards' Conclave had attempted to find a unifying and loyal figure to secure the Cassilian throne, setting up a young king named Odd within the ruins of Luge, and setting a few wizards to help rebuild. Unfortunately, Odd's legacy was widely rejected. Soon enough, the vast majority of Kycilia's old land had collapsed into independent realms ruled by various generals, nobles, and priests, fighting among themselves. And of course, there was the Wizards' Conclave itself. Seemingly doomed to obscurity, they now arose as a real political force, with the Fourth Conclave, held in 5022, seeing almost 500 wizards in attendance, from lands as distant as Tefkusnud and Tehep. The Conclave's influence would continue to grow in the coming decades and centuries, as it solidified its place in the world order.
It has often been said the War of 7,000 Days marked the beginning of the modern era. From the end of the conflict onwards, gunpowder warfare would increasingly dominate the Thras Sea, while Bebdid, Kenta, Kisaka, and Gorkrag would become some of the most influential countries of modern history, and the Wizards' Conclave, the most influential independent organization in the world. Kycilia's legacy too hovers over the modern era. In time, the war's true memory, true horror, faded from mortal minds, and soon enough, in dimly lit taverns, musty dungeons, overgrown towers and remote mountain caves, cults and cabals of necromancy, dragon supremacists, and others plotted to establish her successor, or even to return the Great Lich to unlife once more.
If you've made it all the way to the end of the video, remember to leave a like, a comment, send it to your friends, and all that other YouTuber stuff. Our next video is probably going to be something a bit different, as we continue to experiment with our style, workflow, and so on, but we think you'll like it. So stay tuned, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can be the first to see it when it comes out. Also, donate to our coffee.